You know what's strange? For years, the conventional wisdom has held that Iran stands on the precipice of collapse. Heavy sanctions, international isolation, military inferiority in conventional terms, and repeated strikes on its territory and leadership. All of these should have broken the Islamic Republic long ago. Yet here we are, with Iran not only surviving, but appearing to advance its strategic position in the Middle East and beyond. It projects power, sustains its economy, and ties down far superior adversaries without ever committing to the kind of direct, decisive battles that history tells us weaker powers usually lose. So what does that actually mean? How is a nation long portrayed as a pariah state managing to reshape regional dynamics and challenge the established order through means that defy traditional metrics of strength? To understand this paradox, we must look beyond the headlines of missile exchanges or proxy skirmishes and examine the system Iran has painstakingly constructed over decades. The origins of this system trace back to the brutal lessons of the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. That 8-year conflict, which cost hundreds of thousands of Iranian lives, exposed the limits of conventional warfare for a nation facing superior technology and international support for its enemy. Out of that experience emerged a doctrine of forward defense, the idea that Iran should not wait to be attacked on its own soil, but should instead create buffers and capabilities to fight its enemies far from its borders. This led to the creation of what became known as the Axis of Resistance. Through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' Quds Force, Iran invested in building relationships with non-state actors and militias across the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon, various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, and Palestinian groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad. These were not mere allies, but integral components of a networked system designed for asymmetric warfare. The key mechanism was plausible deniability combined with high strategic impact at low direct cost. By arming, training, and funding these groups, Iran could project influence, deter aggression, and impose costs on adversaries like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States without risking its regular military forces in open combat. This system functions through a self-reinforcing feedback loop. Iran provides financial resources, advanced weaponry such as drones and missiles, tactical training, and ideological cohesion. In return, the proxies extend Iran's reach, create multiple fronts of pressure, and complicate any adversary's decision-making. The loop sustains itself because success breeds more support and legitimacy. When proxies disrupt shipping in the Red Sea or launch attacks that force expensive defensive responses, it validates the strategy and encourages further investment. The system is resilient precisely because it is distributed. Damaging one node, whether a militia leader or a supply line, does not collapse the entire network. Local grievances give the proxies organic staying power, while Iranian support multiplies their effect without requiring Tehran to bear the full political or military burden. This creates a structural incentive for restraint on both sides. Iran avoids direct war it cannot win, and its opponents hesitate to escalate because the cost would ripple across interconnected theaters. The scale of this system is difficult to fully grasp. Iran's oil exports, primarily to China via elaborate sanctions evasion networks involving shadow fleets, falsified documents, and complex financial arrangements, have averaged around 1.3 to 1.6 million barrels per day in recent years. This generates tens of billions of dollars annually, revenue that, despite discounts and evasion costs, continues to fund both the domestic economy and the external network. One estimate places Chinese purchases alone contributing significantly to Iran's government budget. Meanwhile, the Houthis campaign in the Red Sea, using relatively inexpensive drones and missiles, forced major shipping companies to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope. This added weeks to journey times, spiked insurance premiums, and disrupted global supply chains, imposing costs estimated in the billions on the world economy and highlighting how low-cost, asymmetric tools can achieve outsized effects. Hezbollah's arsenal and positioning in Lebanon similarly tie down Israeli resources across its northern border. These numbers reveal a magnitude of influence disproportionate to Iran's conventional military capabilities, turning economic survival into strategic leverage on a regional scale. But something changed in recent years. The escalation cycle that began with events in Gaza in late 2023 and intensified through 2024 and into 2026 brought direct confrontations. Israeli and American strikes targeted Iranian assets and even senior figures. The pressure on the proxy network intensified, with significant losses for groups like Hezbollah. Alliances were tested as Russia and China provided varying degrees of support amid their own geopolitical calculations. Why now? Because Iran's growing influence, its nuclear advancements as a hedge, and its role in challenging the post-Cold War order forced adversaries to act more decisively. The old equilibrium broke. What had been a managed system of indirect pressure suddenly faced concentrated kinetic challenges, exposing both the system's strengths and its vulnerabilities at the same moment. As these shifts unfolded, pressures began building across multiple interconnected domains. Economically, sanctions bit harder but were met with ever more sophisticated evasion, including cryptocurrency and barter systems, reinforcing ties with China and Russia. Politically, Iran positioned itself as a leader of resistance against perceived Western hegemony, gaining sympathy in parts of the global South, even as it lost ground in some Arab capitals. Militarily, the asymmetric capabilities created a deterrence paradox. Direct attacks on Iran risked unleashing a wider proxy response that could destabilize energy markets and global trade. These forces interconnected in dangerous loops. Economic resilience funded military proxies, which in turn created political leverage and military complications for opponents. A disruption in one arena fed escalation in another, turning isolated incidents into compounding structural strain. These aren't separate problems. They interact in a system collision. A strike on Iranian territory might trigger Houthi attacks on shipping, raising oil prices and straining the global economy. Proxy resilience forces adversaries into prolonged, expensive engagements that erode political will at home. Feedback loops amplify. Each successful evasion or disruption encourages further adaptation, while the costs accumulate on the other side. The chain reaction reveals the fragility of relying on conventional superiority against a distributed, adaptive network. What looks like chaos is actually the predictable outcome of colliding incentives, Iran's need for survival meeting the adversary's need for decisive victory in an environment where decisive victory is structurally elusive. What outcomes might this produce? In one scenario, Iran's strategy leads to a de facto recognition of its regional role, with adversaries exhausted by the attritional costs and seeking accommodation within a multipolar framework. Economic ties with Asia deepen, stabilizing the regime and allowing reconstruction. Proxies reconstitute in more decentralized forms, preserving influence without inviting total destruction. In a more pessimistic view, sustained pressure could eventually fracture the system from within as internal economic hardships or proxy overreach lead to miscalculations and devastating retaliation. The truth likely lies in between, with the system proving more durable than many assume, but not invincible. The open-ended nature of these possibilities underscores that no single event will determine the outcome. The system's internal logic will. These aren't separate stories. They are the same story. The story of how modern power operates not through direct confrontation, but through the careful management of systems, incentives, and pressures. Iran's approach underscores a fundamental reality. In an interconnected world, the ability to impose costs asymmetrically and sustain resilience under sanction can be more decisive than traditional measures of strength. That should concern all of us, as it signals a shifting landscape where old rules no longer guarantee outcomes. Sexpert.